Welcome to the Tesseract podcast, where we unlock your power to innovate. Our mission is to empower airmen, connect them to resources, and accelerate change across the Air Force logistics enterprise. Specifically, our team works as an innovation accelerator assigned to the Air Staff Logistics Directorate, where we partner with airmen to operationalize the new sustainment strategy. My name is James, and I'm going to be your host today. Today I'm joined by Matt Nelson, the Chief Technical Officer of BESPIN and a Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves. Matt, welcome to the show.
Yeah, excited to be here. This is great. Heck
yeah. So I called you a thought innovator earlier and you laughed, but it's true. What's your history? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so, I spent 15 years active duty. And then I got out and did 3 years inside of commercial industry, at Rise 8 as a COO and a startup, person that was helping grow a business from 2 people to 75 people. And now I just got back into government civil service as an NHO4 supporting BESPIN. But, all of that kind of ties back into what I feel is my passion, which is bringing innovation to life. And I love Dan Ward's kind of definition of innovation. It's change with impact. So you got to be able to change, but then that change has to really drive an impact and hopefully in a positive way. And that's what keeps me going is how can we bring innovation into the hands of the people that need it most? And for me, that's, our warfighters. It's pretty great.
That's awesome. I really like that quote. I had not heard that for the record because we have talked about disruption a lot in the past, and that always, I guess there's a part of me that kind of got triggered by that because that seems there's a sense of conflict in that. And then disrupting obviously means, interrupting and stopping something. That doesn't quite capture what you're always trying to do, but change with impact is a little bit more a nicer, maybe more integrated approach.
Yeah. And to also quote Dan Ward, who's one of my mentors, is you really got to work with people and not to people, because disruption is I'm just going to have this innovation and just push it down their throat and really just here it is. I'm going to give this to you. But if you bring those people along with you in that journey, it's not disruption anymore. It's more collaboration and getting people on the same page, because at the end of the day, you can't be a shark and just do it all on your own. You really need to bring a team of teams together and do it together, or it's never going to succeed, because, the DoD is a massive bureaucracy. There's a lot of antibodies that could grow in that bureaucracy if you're not careful.
When Matt brings up, innovation in the DoD and trying to work with people, he's someone that I would believe when he talks about that. He's got a lot of experience. Could you speak to a little bit more of your background in innovation and, what brought you to that current mindset that you have of working with people?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I would say my innovation journey started at Education with Industry. I did an EWE assignment in Seattle, Washington, working for Boeing. And the things I learned there, and I was on a factory floor, really just theory of constraints principles around visualizing your work, identifying the bottleneck, using a Kanban board to basically show flow in through a system, because, on a factory floor that's producing P9 jets, you really have to kind of have that nailed down and on cords when things are broken and all of those really smart things that I saw and observed as an EWE officer. I wanted to bring back to my next job, which happened to be the targeting and GeoInt program manager. And within there, I quickly saw that the bottleneck was getting software out to the field. And I just got lucky to be at the right place at the right time, where that targeting and GeoInt program office became basically the seed that was planted that turned into Kessel Run. And that whole journey really got, I guess myself just really sold in hook, line, and sinker on, hey, this is the way to work. This is how we can do it. We can introduce, modern practices from theory of constraints and agile software delivery and DevSecOps to eliminate that bottleneck of software just sitting on the shelf or users waiting, years for an update to happen. So that's what really got me going. And, I could go on and on about the Kessel Run journey and, all the lessons learned there as well.
Well, I'd say let's start on that. So for those of you unfamiliar with Kessel Run and BESPIN for that matter, these are software factories. What is a software factory responsible for in kind of today's parlance?
Yeah, and I would love to have like a common definition of what a software factory is, but the one that doesn't exist right now. So I would think Matt Nelson's definition of what a software factory is, it's the ability to continuously deliver software into the field. And, there's a value line there. And the software factory has to control the things below the value line and also produce articles or, software applications that are above the value line into the warfighter. So that value line is the dev environment, your pipelines, your build tools, your test tools, your scanning tools, all of those things that like used to take people months and weeks and manual steps to complete now can happen in an automated way, just like, going through a pipeline or a assembly line in a factory is kind of the concept. It almost seems draconian though, of like, hey, this is just a factory. I think it's even more than that. It's really just, it's almost like this is a culture. This is a way that we think about the principles around agile delivery and really like trying to delight the user and establishing continuous delivery so you can learn and always iterate on your capabilities. So that's how I would define a software factory. And, back in 2016, 2017 timeframe, that term never existed. And we didn't come in, at targeting a GOINT and then partnering with the AOC to say, hey, we're going to build a software factory. What we really wanted to do was follow the principles of the continuous manifesto and really just say, hey, let's, or the DevSecOps manifesto or the DevOps manifesto, let's just establish continuous delivery and have that audacity to do that. And we learned that, hey, from an innovation perspective, there's a lot of people and processes and technologies that you're going to have to bring to bear to, create that flywheel, which is continuous delivery.
So one of the things I'd like to tease out in the course of this conversation is the kind of complexity of the environment that you're describing, the ecosystem of continuous delivery. But it's also important. I'm probably going to keep asking you to define things, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So DevSecOps and DevOps. What is it? Why is it important?
Yes.
Metaphors are okay because sometimes you have to use metaphors for these things.
I love it. Yeah. So I would say, a lot of people get this notion of like DevOps is you bring your developer team and your engineers and you sit them next to your operators or your warfighters, and that's DevOps. And that's not the definition that the community outside of the DoD uses. DevOps is really, hey, I am going to build this software capability and I'm going to work with my operations team, which is the IT infrastructure team. And in the DevSecOps cases, like our security accreditation team to really create this feedback mechanism of, hey, I want to bake in all of those constraints that you are concerned with up front so we don't have to bolt them on in the back end from a testing perspective, from a security compliance perspective, from a day two ops piece of like, hey, it worked on my machine. Now when I get it into production, it doesn't work because you didn't have those conversations of what does my production environment look like? That's really what DevSecOps is about. And like, I think a good metric is for that is like, how many times are your developers having beers with your operations team or having beers with your security team? Because those conversations that naturally happen because of that create the culture of what it means to operate in a true DevSecOps fashion. It's having empathy for your security team and learning from them and baking that in. Same with your operations team. And you can't do that with just documentation and checklists and all of that. It has to be the people and the culture and the rituals of always, learning from each other and working with, not to, as that example.
Sure. So, DevSecOps, development security, and operations, there are a lot of situations where those three kind of areas of responsibility are kind of in gentle conflict with each other. There's the tension there. The developer makes a change, and the security team has to be abreast of that change, and it might affect downstream operation, the ops team with that. So that's why that kind of cooperation is important. And to the point of continuous delivery, then with things that are not software, it's a lot easier to visualize kind of a chain, like a supply chain of distinct events that happen in a row to produce some kind of value stream, right? But in the world of software, you talk about this continuous value stream, which is like a bunch of very, very quick chains. You deploy software and then you realize you need to change something. That change maybe needs to get done overnight.
Yeah. Exactly. So one of the beauties of continuous delivery is small batch sizes, right? Like take, for example, if you were wanting to send out 500 wedding invitations and you're, folding up your invitations, putting it in an envelope, writing the address and putting the stamp on them. And, you bundle up to 500 of them. And then you realize, I had a mistake. My soon-to-be bride's name is misspelled in these invitations. And because you bundled up all of that work together, that's a massive amount of rework and a massive amount of change that's going to happen. And it's also a lot of churn inside of that ecosystem. I'm giving this example because if you just had smaller batches and you delivered, you made 2, and then you did a QC check on those 2, and you're like, oh, I just have a spelling error in this. Let me fix the other 498 so I can continuously get this out. So that is, in essence, one of the fundamental principles of continuous delivery is those small batch sizes, building those, getting those out, measuring to see what the effect of that was, and learning from that. And you got to have strong principles in place to do that. And you can't always just bundle up your work and expect that it's going to go correctly the first time.
I like that metaphor. I'm going to pull on that just a little bit more. Yeah. So imagine that your wedding invitations, you open it up and it's actually like a pop-up, like a storybook kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And you have one team working on the kind of illustrations that eventually pop up out of this book. You have another team with the text, another team with like the typeface and whatever pictures are present and stuff like that. So when you have that small batch, you get to see kind of continuously as you're developing out what this end product should look like. Maybe your teams come together and you realize that the text is actually, over an illustration or something like that. That's kind of getting more towards the complexity of how things integrate and how it's important to be continuously like monitoring and changing these things with the small batches. It's rich, it's complicated, it's, good metaphor, but there's a lot.
But the beauty of software is, right, like if you architected your system in a way like this wedding invitation system, is you should be able to deploy individual components of that invitation without having to, integrate every single time with the entire, team, or this
putting the whole thing together
at once. What that means is like you have independently testable, independently fieldable components of your software and doing and writing those integration tests when they're ready to be written. So you're always double checking and learning, as components versus, as an entire entity, which really creates a lot of complexity and sprawl and a lot of coordination. So that's another beauty of, this whole DevSecOps, push is, hey, how can we establish independently fieldable and independently testable mechanisms and software? Because the nature of it being digital and being able to test, in an integration environment, you're allowed to do that versus like from a hardware perspective where you actually have to physically touch and
produce
things together.
Yeah, and produce things. Yep. Did you get that metaphor from somewhere? Is that going to be the new DevSecOps metaphor, the invitation?
I don't know about that. We'll see.
Okay. So that is, that's Matt Nelson, CTO of BESPIN, today on DevSecOps. What was your perspective kind of closer to that early Kessel Run, more nebulous what it was as an organization? You have this kind of thing that you're trying to get after that's to do with GON, but you don't have this perfect image of what the responsibilities, whose responsibilities are where, and how that's going to actually shake out. Talk me through some of the kind of lessons learned and the good things and the bad things that happened that led you to that current understanding of DevSecOps.
Yeah, so a good microcosm of this is an application called the Joint Targeting Toolbox. This application, wasn't independently testable and independently fieldable. It was part of a larger software baseline. So in theory, that's great because then you have one baseline that you're managing and it's easy to kind of understand and get your head around that. But in practice, there's a lot of bottlenecks in that process. So the story around JTT was we would build it, and let's just say JTT 5.1 was ready to go. And we built it. We got all the new features in that the users requested. We tested it in our local environment, and it worked. But then it has to get fielded onto GeeksJ, which is another system inside of the overall enterprise. And it's got to get tested and fielded and make sure it integrates well with GeeksJ. So it's highly dependent. It's not independently fieldable there. It's highly dependent on GeeksJ, and they have their own testing timelines and integration points, and it's all being done manually. So you kind of get onto that release train. And if you pass that, not get feedback, hey, you couldn't integrate correctly, go back and field, and you get in that death spiral of waiting and getting fixed and waiting. Then it goes into the AOC baseline, which on top of that is its own timeline and own processes for being able to do fielding and integration, because you got to first test it, at your staging environment inside of, at Langley Air Force Base and really learn. And then after a year of making sure that all works and gets integrated, then it goes out into the field. And then you're actually fielding, actually going out with a team of people, installing that onto a server in, at locations all around the world. That timeline was 5 to 7 years after something was developed. And so anything could be better than that. So how do you then really unpack that? So how you unpack that is bringing in things that from that value line perspective that allow you to eliminate some of those bottlenecks. So a platform, for example, is below the value line. End users don't need to care if you're writing on, Red Hat or Rancher or anything else. All they need to care is you're delivering software that they love. And so with this value line perspective back to the platform is it abstracts the complexity of being able to, it's got to work on this environment. It's got to work on this environment. It makes it, multi-cloud is a good, use case for a platform. And in the JTT perspective is, hey, wouldn't it be beautiful if we could just deploy this capability and not have to rely on fielding teams and physical servers and being a part of a weapon system baseline, and just get it out the door on a cloud infrastructure that you don't have to send a physical person to get it installed, and then just talk to the data that lives inside GeeksJ and the AOC to make it work. And so that was the journey that I got on to kind of navigate that processes, which led to Kessel Run and all of the complexities around getting software out of this big monolith, which was the AOC baseline, into components of that kill chain that were independently fieldable and independently testable. So it eliminated that 7-year timeline and really pushed it down into when you got the application accredited and tested that first time, and we built it in a way that with automated checks and automated testing, and with our AO that says, yes, I'm confident that what you built is not going to break in production. You can go ahead and field this capability. We reduced that 7-year timeline into, it took us 6 months to get, a smaller version of JTT out the door. And then we were making updates weekly versus every 7 years, which is, a pretty drastic change. And that's not even half the story with, the Kessel Run and the tanker planning tool and all the headlines that you see and read on like fastcompany.com and stuff like that.
But that is a really good example for a lot of reasons. The thing that strikes me particularly is that that 7-year timeline with handing it off and comparing against different baselines, that mirrors the kind of analog process for something like hardware, right? That's a great example of where policy and business practices at the enterprise or across the enterprise, as they pertain to digital solutions, really need to be fundamentally re-examined. Right. You don't need to be, like you said, you don't need to be mailing things back and forth in 7 years for that one chain. Yeah. That is absolutely obscene. You said then down to 6 months for a major, like actually putting it into production. And then you could do weekly updates. And that was done through, a little bit of automation to make sure that things are compliant and stuff like that. That's really great. In a nutshell, from there to Kessel Run being kind of responsible for the AOC, portfolio of software efforts, you give just a quick gist of how that happened? Yeah.
So, at the same time we were trying to take on the JTT challenge, it just happened to be serendipitous. I really think the stars aligned here. This was the time, the late, great Senator John McCain said, AOC program 10.2, you're getting canceled. They just went back up for a non-McCurdy breach saying, hey, we just need another $300 million more, and I promise we'll get working software out the door. I know you've been waiting 4 years for us to get working software out the door, and I know we've spent about $500 million on a lot of strong technical design documentation and a lot of testing out and trying to figure out this complex monolithic software baseline that is AOC 10.2. Senator McCain said, you're done. We're canceling this program. But with the luck of fate is we still had that funding inside of our program element at the AOC. What we were doing, with JTT and also with DIU and the Tinker Planner tool, we basically laid down the plumbing for a smart continuous delivery pipeline that was using a platform to get out into the cloud. And we really said, hey, AOC, why don't you come along with us and go on this DevSecOps journey together? Because my little JTT program of about $12 million a year versus AOC at $100 million a year, that really put Kessel Run on the map. You no longer just a proof of concept. The Air Force is making a big bet on how to do this correctly. The thing that got us going there was a lot of things. And it's not just a thing, actually. So what we learned is you don't need, deliverables of CDs for source code. When you stand up a dev environment and you put your source code in a repo like GitLab, it's with you from day one. And if you build with government people and partner with industry, you own that software from day one, because that's how the laws around data rights work. All of that really enabled us to own the technical baseline. And it brought people from being cubicle engineers that would just write systems engineering plans or review documents from the contractor to actually being true hands-on engineers and owning the technical baseline and not just outsourcing it and thinking it's just a black box, I hope it works. And that journey grew from one team, which was the Tinker Planner tool at DIU, to the JTT teams, to the 26 or so teams that you see within Kessel Run today. And it just kept going because we really almost got drunk a little bit on continuous delivery and CI/CD pipelines. And the reason why I say we got drunk a little bit on that was because, what we were trying to solve is a really complex system of systems challenge. And where you're doing it at building many monolithic applications together, there is a balance there. And, it's not the 5 years, $500 million technical design approach that AOC 10.2 had, but it might not have been, hey, let's just get a bunch of applications out there that are part pieces of an overall kill chain, but really upfront defining those governance standards for API first development and all of the things to make it a good integrated system of systems up front. And that's one of the lessons learned with like the whole Kessel Run journey. But like, that's just one thing that we're evolving to and learning from a crawl, walk, run perspective. But we did that ourselves and we became more digitally fluent because of it. And that's what I think the beauty of Kessel Run and the beauty of software factories that, have spawned out of the Kessel Run, kind of concept was, hey, I want to be digitally fluent because it's actually a more rewarding and pleasant place to work than just me getting stuck behind a cubicle and reviewing contract deliverable documents and writing systems engineering plans. You don't get that same level of satisfaction of like, I just made an app go into production and I'm getting feedback from a warfighter on that capability.
That is awesome. That is awesome. There's a lot to unpack there, but I want to move on to BESPIN, right? Which is currently what you do, right? So you learned all those lessons in standing this up, and of course still learning lessons, right? But you brought those lessons into your current role and into BESPIN. What's different about BESPIN?
So the awesome thing about BESPIN, and let me just take a step back and define what BESPIN is for people who don't know what it is, it is the mobile software factory for the DoD. And mobile right now inside the DoD we are early adopters at best. And even though like mobile really took off when the iPhone came out back in like 2012, and we're about a decade late to that game, but we're always laggards when it comes to technology. But there's 5 billion mobile devices out there in the world. So everybody has a supercomputer in their pocket. And how can we tap into that vast opportunity, which is mobile, which will be the next accelerant on the battlefield for resilient basing and agile combat employment. That's just my, opinion of where we need to take our concept operation in military. So BESPIN is wants to be the thought leader and the hub of mobile software delivery inside the Air Force. So that's a long-winded answer about what BESPIN is, but how I'm involved in BESPIN was when I got out of the military in 2020 to go into the commercial industry. I became a reservist and was supporting BESPIN. And I fell in love with the problem that BESPIN's trying to solve with the mobile piece. But I also fell in love with the fact that we have 101 Delta 7 airmen that we're bringing along with this journey to become like the next digital age and the next generation inside the Air Force. It's no longer anchored on industrial age practices and processes, but more like those digital, native, thoughts around DevSecOps. And that's what these airmen coming straight out of tech school have only been exposed to. And I'm super excited to see like what that generation is going to do and take DevSecOps and take agile delivery to the next level. It's going to be pretty powerful.
There's lots of layers of force multiplication happening there with where you talk about how many mobile devices we have. I think it's safe to assume that there's about one device per airman at least at all times, right? But then also the idea of BESPIN being a means to deploy to them is a force multiplication thing, because all apps are, generally speaking, you kind of create this thing and then you can kind of use it, more or less anywhere and any time, as long as, you're kind of within the right domain. But also strengthening that 1 Delta 7 enlisted community of people getting to work on different projects that touch, different parts of the Air Force, and then deploy real tools for people to use. That's like an inspirational thing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so and another cool thing about BESPIN is we weren't built to, transform a legacy program like the AOC. We were stood up to be that enterprise service for mobile. So what that really means is we are learning how to create processes and business rules and people around how to create like a really great developer team experience, making sure that they can be productive on day one with web app templates, and their development account is created and ready to go, and all their tooling and all their licenses associated with that is there, and we keep the pipeline up and running. We're always continuously improving that to make sure we have the best cybersecurity posture that we can and the best testing approach that we can to make sure that these capabilities that are leaving our pipeline are work and safe for our airmen to use. So that piece in and amongst itself didn't exist in the 1 Delta 7 career field 3 years ago. None of that even existed just 3 years ago. I mean, before that, a lot of the 1 Delta 7s, and BESPIN has the largest 1 Delta 7 population in the entire Air Force. A lot of those were working on SharePoint apps. They were managing file servers. They were working on making sure that IT infrastructure was inventoried correctly. That's not going to move the needle in the next fight. But if we can train these people to be able to be force multipliers, and if they have a problem and they know that warfighter can use a digital component to solve it, we then have given them and equipped them with the capabilities to be able to be that force multiplier and not just treated as a second-class citizen doing inventory of IT equipment.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're investing in them, right? And that probably gives them a lot of job satisfaction, to the point earlier about then them working on projects that become real things deployed to field level units. We at Tesseract absolutely get giddy when we hear such a thing as things getting to operational airmen. So broadly speaking, the factory, software factory, is the kind of metaphor that we use to describe this. And then you talk about a pipeline. What could you explain kind of the policy / IT construct that is the continuous ATO, and why that's important for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the continuous ATO is anchored on NIST 853 security controls.
Look it up.
Yeah, it's a great read. I love it. And what that really means is there are around 700 to 900 security controls that you need to meet, and they're good. Good. Most of them, at least I would say, are good cybersecurity best practices that you need to introduce into your code base. But it's written as like an entire weapon system. So when I say weapon system in this context, it's your server rack, your networking equipment, your data management and your databases, and then also your application and your business logic and your front end UI. All of that has a security control somewhere in that tech stack that is mapped back to NIST 853. And normally you build it. And when I say normally, I would say in the past,
yeah,
you would build it and you would only focus on, I really, really want to just get like a prototype out the door so I can, start testing on it. So you're only focused on features and feature development, and you're building up a lot of debt because you aren't addressing some of these fundamental things that you needed to address at the very beginning. And then you go into test, and you didn't write any automated tests into your software delivery process. And that's part of the pipeline is test automation. You didn't do test-driven development. So now you have potentially hundreds of test points or test cards that you would have to manually click through on your application and verify the functionality of your capability. Now you can do that automatically, but then you're still not done after those 100 test points. You got to write that body of evidence to show your AO, because it's zero trust environment. It's always been a zero trust. Well, we're getting better at zero trust environment. But one of the things is like, you shouldn't just trust the words of like, hey, I built it securely. You can kind of just trust me. You want that body of evidence to say, I built it securely and here's how I did it. And so that's the cybersecurity accreditation process, which when I first came into Kessel Run, I reached out to our SCAS, which is our security control assessor, and said, hey, can you give me a timeline on how long this RMF process takes? And she gave me
the risk management framework.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was 406 days. It was an average 406 days. It's like, wow.
Better than 7 years.
Well, and
that's only one part of it.
Years is like, we already went through 406 days of RMF. So it's really 8 years at that point in time. Yeah. So let's be honest with ourselves. But I was like, holy cow, like there's got to be a better way, because now it's going to take us 406 days to manually write these, manually scan the code, find any bugs, do any vulnerabilities. And now you have the ability to do that in an automated fashion. You're inheriting a lot of your controls from accredited cloud infrastructure. So that wipes out, 400, 500 of your controls. And then you're inheriting a lot of your controls from your platform, your cloud service provider services. So that wipes out a lot more controls that you don't have to worry about as an application developer. And then you can automate the rest of those controls to the maximum extent possible with scanning tools and with, testing and with making sure you close your security chores that your app security team has given you, and done that in code and in processes with them instead of waiting. So all of that is truly part of that, pipeline that we're talking about, because at the end of the day, you want to get software applications out of that pipeline that you can trust. And the only way you can do that is if you bake in those pieces up front, or you're just getting prototypes out of a build process that you then have to do manually.
If you'll humor me, I'm gonna attempt another metaphor here, just to kind of get after the complexity of developing software. And I've used this before, and maybe up to interpretation. Actually, maybe you'll be a good person to confirm or deny this. But I say that building modern software, by some measures, is a similar amount of complexity to designing and procuring an aircraft. There's that many things working together. You're building on that many thousands of man hours that they get put into these tools, that then the tools get put together and become toolkits. And then you start developing with, 15 different toolkits in your tech stack, and they're constantly maintained. They're updated on weekly, monthly, yearly basis. And ultimately you're working on operating systems, which are like a whole thing of itself that have been going back to the 70s or 50s, 60s. It's a titanic problem, right? And your example of someone that's developing software, they want to focus on feature development. So you're trying to create a button, right, that does some function. That's what's driving the need for a piece of software. In the metaphor that you're building an airplane, imagine you're standing in an empty hangar and you're trying to add a new sensor on to that airplane. Without any of that the templating and the kind of continuous process and everything kind of pre-vetted, you're trying to design a sensor and kind of tack it on to just the area where it would go if there was an aircraft there.
And I love that analogy, right? So let's unpack that analogy, right? So let's just say within software, you have to make architectural decisions up front. Like, what's going to be my, hosting environment? Am I going to use a platform? What's going to be my network? That is similar to the fuselage and the wiring and the air ducting of the aircraft. That's your architectural decisions. So then you have the scaffolding of, our analogy of the aircraft. You have basically the wiring and the fuselage all ready to go. You have that with, your CI/CD pipeline and your dev environment. All of that is, at your fingertips on day one. But you're still not at features at that point in time. Now you need to understand, okay, what happens when I put this sensor on? What is it going to do when I integrate that into the circuitry of the aircraft? So I can either do a manual test of like how that is going to have any static issues with integration on other pieces of equipment,
which looks like kind of plugging it in and then like taking a multimeter into different spots.
Exactly.
And literally just like checking.
Yeah. So, but you can do that automatically with test-driven development of like, we expect it to do this, and then we're going to scan it through our pipeline to make sure it worked. And then we're also going to check for other things from you screwed it on rightly, from a security, it's safety of issue, and being able to release. So like, I really do think like you can unpack that analogy all the way down into features, because you want to everything on like the value line proposition, in this case, the fuselage, the wiring, the HVAC equipment on the aircraft, that's all below the value line from a software perspective, because the value is what you're going to be doing with that. Like, what is, a feature of the aircraft? It could be like, hey, we want to put this laser on it or whatever. And that's the feature that you want to really drive to and make delight the users. The users don't care that you have beautiful wiring below, underneath like the skin of the aircraft, but architects do.
Yep. That actually, that brings the value line, that concept home for me, thinking about that. Right. Yeah. But okay. Well, I apologize for that was a lot of tech talk in a row there, but I hope
you didn't lose anybody.
Yeah, it's okay. It's very, very good to hear, and kind of like I alluded to earlier, you're kind of the right person, or one of the right people to talk about, talk to this, as far as the DoD space, because I feel like we'd be missing out if we didn't at least mention why we're face to face here right now. We're in Austin, Texas. Matt invited myself and Tech Sergeant Dan Costi from the Tesseract team to come to a software coalition. Real quick, why did we do this?
Yeah.
Why does the coalition exist, and why did you invite us?
I would say the software factory movement, when it got off the ground, had a bunch of great white sharks inside of that ecosystem. They were strong, they were powerful personalities that could really just like get stuff done through sheer tenacity. And that got us to a great place. But inside of the DoD, you don't need to become a great white shark to be the king of the ocean, because great white sharks aren't a team player. They're not, they're isolated creatures. And inside of the coalition, we need to pivot from being great white sharks to orca whales, right? Orca whales are actually the true kings of the ocean, in my opinion, and they don't do it because they have the tenacity and the strength and the gusto to do it all by themselves. They're a pod of organizations that come together through intelligence and networking to be able to be on the top of the food chain. And that's what I think the coalition is all about, is like, how can we bring kings of the ocean, orca whales, together to create a pod to achieve amazing results that we couldn't do by ourselves. We brought in the Aussies, we brought in the Brits, we brought in the Canadians, we brought in Wavelength, we brought in Platform One, we brought in Army Software Factory, we brought in Kessel Run, and all of us shared conversations around, hey, how are you doing continuous monitoring? Oh, you do that? Can I leverage that capability for my problem set? How are you doing talent management? Oh, you have like a skills matrix. Can I leverage that for my problem set? Like that, in the spirit of open source, that is basically the conversations that this coalition is having. And the other true thing is, because we're now, a family of orca whales in this analogy, we have a much stronger voice than we could if we were just, solitary great white sharks swimming in the ocean.
I think you have there's no logo for the coalition, right?
No, I don't think so.
Uh-oh. Might be one now. All right. Well, that's pretty awesome. A lot of great information, and I know that we could go on for a long time. But I'd like to wrap up with just a couple kind of feel-goody questions. What's your favorite part about working in the Air Force, both as a uniform member but also as a civil servant?
It's the relationships that you get to meet in the working in the Air Force. One thing I didn't like about being a contractor was you kind of get this weird feeling of weird, slimy contractor, and like the relationships because of that aren't as tight as they could be. And one thing, as a person coming from industry back into the government, I don't want to have that feeling with my industry partners. I want to create that psychological safety with them, that they don't feel like a slimy partner and they feel like a true ally in this fight, because they are. And you get to create those relationships. And it's just, over time, like hopefully that relationship building that I'm going to invest in, like, with you guys and with Platform One and with everything, is really just going to be amazing. And I think it's just much easier to do inside the government than outside looking in. And that's one of the things that I like about the government versus, being an industry partner.
That's awesome. Yeah. Matt, thanks for joining me on the show.
Yeah, dude. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Tesseract podcast. This show is how I started to learn about enterprise-level strategy and the innovation ecosystem within the Air Force, and I hope we passed along some learning to you with this episode. If you'd like to engage with our team, make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and connect with us on LinkedIn. Any references to trademarked, copyrighted, or protected products or services such as books, movies, or businesses are used here for the limited purpose of education and professional development of Air Force Airmen. If you have any questions, please contact us at www.tesseract.af.mil.